Alright, welcome back to Game 10 of Lucid's 2022 tournament, where we are playing Phlegra. It was turn 41. We've got quite a bit of research finishing. Let's see, we finished Evocation 6. I believe this would give us access to Wailing Winds once we get the crosspath, though that is somewhat rare, only possible on our Tyrants, so somewhat speculative. Firestorm would also be nice for us, but that'll be at Evocation 7. We are doing some thaumaturgy research, which we had not researched yet, so we got quite a bit of research pretty quickly. Not actually sure what we're aiming at here. Probably Soulslay, if I had to guess. We do have access to more Astral than Late Age Phlegra normally has, since 2 of our thrones give us decent Astral mages. We have a throne claim from Atlantis, Throne of Knowledge, definitely a nice throne. And then we get attacked in a location by Utgard. Like I said, I believe this is part of the agreed peace, though potentially still raiding. Yeah, this definitely looks like an attack still, or I don't know, it'd be a weird way to take over a province that was agreed upon. You'd expect, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe they only have mages available, but it seems expensive. So perhaps the peace was not agreed to just quite yet by the sub, or they hadn't quite hammered out all the details. But like I said, I'm pretty sure I take over this turn, so not sure what's going on here. Definitely Utgard is going to take this. There's only 1 province defense here. And they don't lose any mages. That's always nice for them. Not good for us. But like I said, the fighting will be done. And this is really just mostly an exchange of provinces. We also witnessed some battles that Vedheim is involved with. Vedheim is involved fighting a lot of people. So this is a group from Ulm, kind of an interesting one. Wow, this is a seriously kitted out human commander with a lot more hit points than I would have expected. That's from his heroic trait. Normally this much gear on a human, not a great idea, but with 45 hit points, yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable. He also has some friends here to give him some additional buffs, and it sounds like he's up against, yeah, an actual force. I think we saw this. This is the Foul Vapors trap that Vedheim used mostly against Ulm's mercenaries. So it should be kind of an interesting fight from a troop standpoint. Well, these Zizzes could be dangerous potentially. Though they do have mundane weapons, and I think I saw a body ethereal get thrown out in terms of this thug surviving. He does have a lot of poison resistance due to his gearing, so he should be safe from foul vapors. Yeah, here come the Zizzes. So he lost one of his buddies that was helping him out, but that's often the fate of those guys throwing buffs on heavy thugs or super combatants, kind of just built in. There are a lot of mages here, but it doesn't look like any of them are set to advance and cast spells. One of them is an Astral Mage, who is old and diseased. Does have poison resistance, only 10 though, with 3 hit points. Still, he is an Astral 3 with plenty of Astral Pearls, and he's put himself to sleep. Oh, interesting. He's actually being used as a communion slave. Well, he definitely won't be soul-slaying anyone, but I think soul-slay is probably the most reasonable answer. I mean, I don't know. You could turn timer him, I guess, with all the skeletons. Like, yeah, this guy's definitely not killy enough to cut through all this. And it looks like his morale has failed anyway. Those Zizzes do have fear auras. Also, magic resistance of 12, so I would be pretty concerned about soul-slay. Let's go ahead and speed this up and see if he escapes. If he doesn't make it out, okay, he did make it out. I was going to say, once he gets surrounded by all the skeletons, forget it. So Vedheim does win this one. I would say this is not a great exchange for Ulm because they lose both of the fellows that were buffing that guy up. They do retain the hero though, and these aren't that expensive, but still for what they accomplished, that add up to the Silver Order does die, but I mean he was like diseased, 3 hit points. I do think that means Vedheim loses all those Astral Pearls. That's a little painful, but kind of a wash. Not super important for either side, I would say. And it looks like this is actually, they're fighting over the remains of Gath here, because this is the same province, and I'm assuming, yeah, this is the same force from Vedheim that's now assaulting Gath's fort, and there's nothing in here, so they'll be able to take it. Though they're probably, yeah, see, slime and such, so they're probably out of gems, and the plan was probably just to poison them, but these guys have been enough skeletons, they'll be fine. And indeed they do win, but it looks like the wall archers do manage to take out a mage, one of the more expensive ones, but not the end of the world. Always hurts to lose a mage to basically nothing. But Vedi don't have a lot of hit points, so that will definitely happen to Vedheim. We have some unexpected events, huge barbarian horde. Hopefully we're prepared for this, but probably not. Children disappearing at night, there's some unrest due to that. Something's gone quite wrong. In this case, in one of our arcane laboratories versus on the battlefield. I think it just means somebody got horror marked is an oppressor archon. That's our cap only mages, so that's a little painful, but not the end of the world. Conjuration rituals are cheaper this month. Probably not going to be taking advantage of that. And then here is the barbarian attack, which we are totally prepared for, right? No, we're not prepared for this. Yeah, you know, heavy cavalry, not the worst against barbarians. That's a lot of barbarians, though, so I think we're going to lose this. And indeed, we were beaten by a stronger force from the independents, so we'll have to retake that from the barbarians. It's not, you know, 60-ish barbarians. It's a good amount. But I have seen worse. We do lose a number of scouts here to Atlantis. Take a look. This is probably the throne location, so we've probably seen these forces. Yeah, this is definitely on top of a throne. And I believe this is the other throne location, the one that is, yeah, on our border here. So we've seen both these forces before. Pretty common, like once you take a throne, hang out for a turn or two, patrol people out. And then Gath has been permanently vanquished. And I will catch you guys after the jump. All right, this is the situation and what we're doing about it. As you can see, things are relatively quiet. We kind of do need a bit of time to rebuild, and frankly, I'm not 100% sure what direction we should go next. As far as I'm concerned, things with Utgard are definitely unfinished, but I also believe, I think most people have a pretty natural expectation that you don't immediately end your non-aggression pact, though obviously that is completely viable by the agreement. But I do think that, you know, if you make a non-aggression pact 3 and then immediately end it the next turn, people are going to be less interested in making pacts with you. And we also got hammered pretty hard. I think the fixes, I still have not seen the battle yet. Foul Vapors, of course, was a big part of it. That's a relatively easy fix, though we don't quite have the research to fully cover our entire army. We're not that far away. And we could certainly cut down on the number of units. You know, like a lot of the bugs have built-in poison resistance. And, you know, we're really just using our human troops as chaff. You know, they weren't really ever intended to be a killing portion of the army. So we could certainly cut down on the human elements of our armies, especially now that we have the tyrants out, and just rely on the lower level poison ward. You know, this covers a decent amount of area, but not your entire army. It sounds like the other problem that we had was the skeleton generation, and you know that is probably best dealt with flyers to try to interrupt the communion. You know, maybe more air elementals. We did have some of that mixed in. Yeah, I really, hopefully I'll get a chance to see the battle. Hopefully you've already seen the battle. All this to say that, you know, I don't think that war with Utgard in the future will be insurmountable, but at the same time, it has not worked out, and in a lot of ways, our borders aren't great, and, you know, our sub, I think, has wisely chosen to sign a non-aggression pact, and I intend on abiding by that, both in terms of the strict reading of it, and not also immediately canceling it. Utgard seems to think that we're on good terms now. You know, they asked me to cast Breath of the Desert on Xibalba, and they offered to pay, though they didn't specify what they were going to pay. I don't really have the energy right now or the inclination, to be doing tasks for them and figuring out, what would be a fair bargain. So we went ahead and declined that. Also in touch with Atlantis, I let them know, because we were sort of working together on our war against Utgard, so I let them know that my sub had signed a non-aggression pact and that I wouldn't be fighting Utgard anymore. They're pretty interested in where we're going to be going next. They've correctly identified that they're one of the likely targets. They laid it out as like, well, it's Atlantis, Mictlan, or Ulm, which is more or less true. Technically, also Vettiheim, although we don't have a very large border with Vettiheim. In the same way, we don't really have a very large border with Ulm. So I think really it's between Mictlan and Atlantis. And I don't really know the relative, strengths and weaknesses and matchups of all, of these nations. I would say in a void, my inclination would probably be Mictlan, both because, they're a blood power. Obviously, we're late enough in the game that they're going to have a lot of their blood elements activated, but probably not all of them. So, things are going to get worse as the game goes later and, Mictlan gets larger. We also know that they're relatively committed in a war that's on their other border. So, in a lot of ways, this makes them a very attractive target. We've also heard that the player is quite excellent. We haven't really seen that, although that's really just a lack of our, scouting. We've seen bits and pieces of the war between them and Vettiheim, but it certainly hasn't been decisive. It's like Vettiheim is still doing fine, despite the fact that Vettiheim is fighting other people, intermittently Utgard. I think now that, we've kind of withdrawn from that, Vettiheim is going to be facing more pressure from Utgard. They're also facing some pressure from Merignón now, as well as Ulm. And interestingly, it looks like Utgard has gone against Merignón. And I am kind of curious because I haven't really seen a ton of movement along like the Atlantis-Utgard border. It's entirely possible that they've signed peace as well. I know in the past, Utgard had suggested a joint war against Atlantis, and I kind of assumed that, once we made peace, they would focus on Atlantis. Since Atlantis has had some substantial losses, though it's been long enough, they've probably more or less recovered from that in their war with Raga. And so it's entirely possible right now that Atlantis is completely unengaged. I know Ulm had made some mentions about possibly fighting against them. We should probably try to get some scouts along the Ulm-Atlantis border. So yeah, we're kind of left with a choice, between a player that is supposedly quite strong versus a player of unknown strength, but also, a player that is engaged versus one that might not be engaged in another war. Atlantis does have good access to Wailing Winds, which is really going to suck for our troops because our morale is not great. At the same time, that's much less of a problem for our tyrants as they're berserkers. And while Atlantis does have some hard-hitting troops, I do think they're going to struggle a lot more as compared to like Utgard in terms of dealing with our tyrants. Though also said, I don't think Mictlan, they're probably more or less in the same boat. Of course, I do think that all of these players are good enough, and we've gotten late enough in the game. And really, it's kind of unavoidable, right? Because tyrants are going to come out like turn 30 at the earliest, which is a little on the early side for super combatant answers, but not that early. So it is kind of interesting because it's like, well, by the time you get your hands on them, people probably have some fairly effective answers in terms of research. So while our tyrants, I think, are going to be more effective against these two nations, I'm also extremely hesitant to just use them completely unsupported. But considering a lot of our support is, going to be our slave units, Wailing Winds is going to be pretty painful. So regardless of which nation we go against, we're definitely going to try a mixture. We're going to try some not unsupported tyrants, but some tyrants that are just getting, buffed by maybe some helper mages and perhaps a few other mages to bring in some battle summons, but not really having much of an army there to help prevent like an HP rout. And then we'll also try, a few tyrants mixed in with armies of varying sizes and, see how that goes. The good news is that as berserkers, even if the army rout penalty kicks in, as long as they've gone berserk and they don't fall asleep, they will continue to fight. So, in some ways we can kind of just use the army to shield them for a part of the combat, and hopefully deal some additional damage and then just sort of let them loose and kind of treat the armies really more as like disposable, wrappers. So we'll see. We're still a long ways from, implementing any of that. And I'm as of yet undecided which direction we'll go. I'll probably take 1 or 2, maybe 3 turns to build up some more mages and some more troops. We obviously did take some pretty heavy losses, though we do still have a relatively large army in the north. And of course, the other aspect is we have non-aggression pacts now with all of our neighbors. So we have guaranteed 3 turns from the moment that I decide to act. So, if we take 3 turns to end the non-aggression pact, we're talking about 6 turns. Late Age Phlegra is not really a nation, I feel like, that, especially once the tyrants come out, peace is a bit of a problem because these guys generate a ton of unrest. In addition to being population killers, right? So they're just killing 70 population every turn, which, isn't catastrophic, but definitely adds up. I think more significantly, they generate 10 unrest every turn, right? So this fellow here who's been hanging out in this province for a few turns, you can see the unrest is up to 74 in a few turns. We won't even be able to do recruitment anymore. This is a relatively valuable province. There isn't really much in the way of income. I mean, still decent income, but compared to what it should be bringing in, not that much. So, parking these guys in your own territory is less than ideal. We'll probably stash them maybe like in this province and this province while we decide what to do, but really like we want to stash them in enemy provinces. Speaking of the settlement that the sub agreed to, we would give up this province, and this province. At the time that I was doing this turn, I wasn't actually sure which provinces we were giving up, so unfortunately we are site searching this for Utgard. It is what it is. In terms of what we were actually doing this turn, just a bit of site searching. We do really want to get kind of our death online and rolling in. So we're going to use our tyrants to try to search around in a few places. But again, we do want to get them out of our valuable provinces relatively quickly. We're also going to try to clear out these barbarians just with some flaming arrows, basically. On our patroller archers, we'll see. It's a little dangerous. There's a decent number of barbarians, but we have a lot of archers here. And this may be a waste of gems, but I would prefer to not lose these patrollers again. We are doing some troop recruitment to try to replenish our losses. That is one of the things, the way that I've cited our forts, and just kind of a late age Phlegran thing in general, is that we can't actually recruit like that many units, every turn. So, we do want to get recruitment going. We'll recruit up, a group of crossbowmen for this southern force, but we're probably going to start to move away from crossbowmen. I do like to have, a group of 40 to 50 in any like major force, but I believe Late Age Atlantis does get at least a little bit of air magic, so at this point they'll probably be able to, put up arrow fend or something like that, and, a lot of our other opponents will pretty soon probably be able to do similar things. So once we re-recruit a contingent of crossbowmen, we'll probably just focus on Mouflon cataphracts, which is what's going on here. We're also going to experiment a little bit. We're going to get a cataphract commander, maybe grab 2 of these guys. They're just better leaders for our large armies. They actually can do formations, and they have the highest level of Taskmaster, I believe, on the nation. No, that is actually not true. Tyrants do technically have a greater Taskmaster value, but at Leadership 30, it's kind of questionable how useful that is. We'll probably also recruit a couple Oppressor Generals, really just to try them out, especially if we go to war with Atlantis, which I am leaning towards, partially just because we have such a massive border, and, I feel like, okay, our Doom stack didn't really work. Maybe we raid pretty well. Definitely Mouflon cataphracts are solid raiders against province defense, and Atlantis does seem to be clumping their units up pretty heavily, and also, doesn't really invest nearly as much in province defense as Utgard. So, you combine perhaps a tendency with Doom stacking, hard to say, this early on and having never fought the player, with a really large border and less investment in province defense, and, maybe we can have a much more effective raiding war this time around. Whereas versus Mictlan, we have a decent border, but it's not that large. So anyway, Oppressor Generals are not super impressive. They're a little more expensive, right, than just your generic Oppressor. I guess they are a bit more survivable, probably significantly more survivable with 14 protection, probably more hit points. 12 hit points versus 10 hit points, no protection. And it would probably be easier to build since they have less magic paths, right? That's really the biggest thing, is that they only get like 1 additional random path, right? So they only have earth, whereas the oppressors are guaranteed, earth, fire, and then they get 1 additional random. The oppressor generals only earth, and then they get guaranteed 1 random. Otherwise, the two are pretty similar. And considering the generals also research less, it just seemed like the oppressors were probably the better way to go. But we might try to recruit some of these guys and, use them as like little raiders or thugs. Definitely wouldn't want to invest much in the way of gear for these guys, but Earth is pretty relevant on thugs, and they're not the worst human chassis to be trying it with. Who knows? Maybe we'll even send like 2 shackled mages out with them. They're still pretty much guaranteed to burn out like any communion they're involved with, right? Because the shackled mages only get the 1 path, and these guys are guaranteed 2 paths. So Late Age Phlegra makes sure that there's absolutely no way to build a sustainable communion. So we'll see. We might recruit a couple of these guys. For the moment, we're not recruiting any of them. We're just focusing on shackled mages. We are producing some more lightless lanterns. Our research, at least, is in a decent place, especially considering all the mage losses that we just took. The sub went ahead and went for Thaumaturgy 5, which I do approve of. We don't have a ton of Astral, but especially with the throne mages that we've been getting. We have significantly more astral than late age Phlegra would normally have. So Soul Slay, definitely going to be relevant if we ever go up against Utgard again, and I'm sure there's plenty of other useful spells in here. Gateway definitely comes to mind in terms of, moving our units around. After that, we're going for Alteration 7, which is a useful pickup in general, Mass Protection and also Fog Warriors, but also potentially Phoenix Pyre, right? We do have some super combatants that maybe could take advantage of that. People argue back and forth about how good of a Phoenix Pyre thug you can really build, but I'm definitely at least willing to try it out once with the Phlegran Tyrants. Anyway, we'll be retooling probably for a few turns, and then I'll have to make a decision about what our next war is going to be, whether it's going to be Atlantis or Mictlan. But we will be going to war again in the not too distant future. Phlegra is definitely not a nation that is built for peace, and I think that more or less covers turn 41.